Hi, everyone. My name is Charlene, and I'm a first-year Say What College consultant. Joining us for this podcast is Leanne Foell. She's a licensed clinical social worker and adolescent therapist. Leanne graduated with a master's in social work with a concentration in child and family welfare. Leanne has been working with teens for the past 5 years in a variety of settings, such as schools, juvenile detention centers, inpatient behavioral hospitals, and in private practice. Leanne specializes with teens who have experienced trauma, and she also gives mental health presentations to students in schools, professional audiences, and for nonprofits who serve youth. She speaks on the unique mental health experiences that teens face, including social media and drug prevention. In this podcast, we had an amazing conversation, starting from mental health all the way to addiction. It's not something that you're going to want to miss, and I hope you enjoy. We did have the pleasure of kind of getting to know each other, but I did want to give you the opportunity just to kind of preface. I know you kind of do like some social work, so to just give you the opportunity to kind of talk about your involvement with youth and how substance abuse kind of ties into that, just kind of what that looks like in your career.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm just a mental health therapist. Social work is one of the directions you can take to get licensed to be a mental health therapist. It's kind of cool. You can do all sorts of things. You could do psychology, you could do counseling, you could do a med school, but I took the social work route, and I see youth clinically in therapy, talk about mental health. Because I'm an LCSW is what it's called, that means I assess, diagnose, and treat youth for mental health issues. Right now, that just looks like individual therapy at a practice in Dallas. But in the past, I've done high schools or juvenile detention centers or hospitals, which is where the social work part comes in. I can also have social work jobs that are like more working with communities and resources and like in a prison, which is what I really, really love about my job is being a mental health therapist, but being a social worker as well. And a lot of the youth that I see sometimes are court-ordered to see me because of drug use or because of being caught vaping at school. And a lot of youth I see are there for mental health issues, but they also have issues with vaping or drug use. And so we talk about that as well. So it comes up all the time in individual therapy. It came up a lot when I worked at a detention center in high schools and stuff like that. But so I see it all the time because I'm helping youth deal with mental health issues. And usually, or sometimes, those are connected, and drug use is talked about as well.
Can you kind of expand more on that? Because you mentioned how the mental health and drug use kind of connects sometimes.
Yeah.
So what are those like kind of correlations? What do those patterns look like, and how have you seen it in youth today?
Yeah, it can kind of be like the chicken or the egg. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Sometimes it's mental health issues and then drug use. Sometimes it's drug use and then mental health issues. So it's a little bit of back and forth. But no matter what, those things work together like in a cycle together. If you start using drugs and you didn't have mental health issues, you're probably going to start to have some depression or anxiety. So it kind of goes back and forth. If you have a hard time dealing with life's ups and downs, you might be more likely to turn to vaping or using marijuana. And so that's where those two are connected. Another big thing, too, is one of the withdrawal symptoms are mental health symptoms. It's I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling low motivation. So that's why those are so intertwined, and they show up at the same time. Yeah,
that's really interesting to hear about. Are there certain things that you hear more than others on how, like, what necessarily like draws, or how do they pick it up in a sense? So have you ever heard like different kind of like variations of, well, maybe they just picked it up in school, like peer pressure? Like, what are different examples of that have you heard of?
Yeah. I mean, like probably talked about a lot, mostly probably peer pressure. But when it comes to mental health, I think a lot of advertising advertises that, hey, you feeling stressed? Vaping's going to help you with that, Hey, you feeling stressed? Buy our product. Like, hey, you feeling stressed? like using marijuana, that's going to make you feel better. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, maybe the stress, had a long day. And we've seen that advertising with, I think, cigarettes as well. I mean, that goes back till as old as time. But yeah, I think it's just kind of talked about that in a way, like, oh yeah, when I'm not doing so good. And maybe the way we see adults. I mean, when adults talk about using substances, legal substances, alcohol, it's like, oh, had a long day, I'm going to have a drink. And so I think that just bleeds down to teens. And they're like, oh, I had a long day. I remember when I vaped that one time at that party, I felt better. Maybe this will make this bad day better. That's probably the most common. The most extreme that I see a lot, because I'm a therapist and I'm in the therapy room dealing with kids who are having a really hard time, is I don't like life at all. Life's not great. And these things can help me to escape for a brief moment. That's probably the most common thing I say. I see, but I know I'm biased because I'm in the therapy room and I'm seeing maybe the most extreme cases. But I see that as well. I don't know. What about you guys? What do you feel like? Do you hear people talk about, oh, I vape because I'm stressed, or I use weed because of, anxiety? I'm not sure if teens maybe talk about it. Maybe it's something that's not talked about.
I think most of the people I've seen, most of the kids at my school that I know who do, I think some of them do because it makes them feel stressed. And a lot of them, I think it's a peer pressure thing. Like they're just, and it's not even just their friends, it's their siblings or their parents or the people around them, because it's just, it's something that they all do. And they've just, they adopt this habit because it's what people around them are doing. And they think that's what I need to do. That's what I need to, they're doing it, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And they use the excuse, well, like, it makes me feel better. Like, I'm stressed. This helps. This is helping. And I think that's how they're convincing themselves that it's better. And that's what the people around them have told them. So they've just...
So that part comes later, that they're like, oh, well, this stress is like an excuse to keep going kind of thing. Maybe not why they start, but why they keep going.
Why they keep going.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think the first time I was really exposed to like vape usage and e-cigarette usage, it was in my immediate friend group. And it was younger, probably like junior high school. And so at that time, we were all really close. So those conversations about, I know you explained it as like extreme, maybe like in your situation, but when you said it, it didn't really catch me that off guard, because we did have some of those conversations of like those feelings of depression or, anxiety and like growing up, just different things going on in the household. I don't think it was like actively connected for like the individual themselves. Like they probably wouldn't have connected the two because I feel like personally at that time, it was just kind of an uproar. It was becoming more prevalent. We started seeing it on social media. So it just kind of coincidentally was during that time where we were growing up and maturing also is when these products really started, becoming more prevalent. Yeah. So we got caught in a bad time, I feel like, for my specific class.
That makes sense. Well, and throw in COVID with that too.
Correct.
People are staying home. People are more reasons to be stressed, anxious, more reason to feel lonely. And so, it kind of sounds like the perfect storm for all of that to happen at the same time. But you don't maybe notice that those are the connections.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned how there were many different ways that you could have, could have went in that kind of medical field. What specifically drew you to the mental health?
Yeah, so I had this internship in Washington, D.C., and it felt really, really cool at the time. Like, I was on the Hill, I was near the White House, and I was doing policy work, but that meant that I was sitting at a chair at a computer, like, from 9 to 5. And the policies were really cool that I was working on, like it was helping real people. Like I had to wear black every day. I just remember thinking like, wait, is this like work life? Like you wear black all the time, you go to work, you sit in a chair for 8 hours. And I was really miserable. And I was at this hearing on Capitol Hill and it was really cool. And these families, like parents were testifying for their kids. And I remember it just hit me like, ooh, I want to work with them. I want to be in the room with the families who are struggling and like help them. I don't want to be here on a computer typing, these people are struggling, so help them. Like I wanted to do it. I wanted to be in the mud. So it was that at that internship that I decided I wanted to do social work and went and continued on and got the right degrees for social work and then therapy. So yeah, I just didn't want to be bored. Maybe is what got me to it. But then of course that the helping professions are just a blast. They're so much fun. Yeah. Which is actually why I picked to work with youth as well. Teens are way more fun than I think anybody else. And so, I specialize in teens for that reason too.
That's really interesting. So, just to kind of touch more on like the different substances that you may see, because we are starting to kind of see more of like THC being, brought into like, youth's hands. We're seeing more of those products becoming prevalent as well. So what has your experience been? Like, was there a certain point in time where you saw one more, likely to be occurred than the other, or just like the similarities and differences with, I guess, nicotine reliance and THC reliance?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that there are ebbs and flows, like things get popular and then unpopular. I think like vaping had its time and then it didn't, and then it came back. I wouldn't necessarily say that I can remember a pattern of like, around this time, THC was more popular. What I see becomes more popular, I think it's more based off of the age group because of the access, right? So if you're in middle school, what do you have access to versus if you're in high school, what do you have access to? Same with what kind of family are you in? If I'm in this kind of family versus this kind of family, maybe I have access to it at home. Maybe I don't have access to it at home. So I would say it's more based on that shift from maybe middle school to high school. I think that's probably a really important time because access changes. I think for some reason, I see more young people having more access to vaping. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's you can convince more people to buy it for you at a vape shop. You can get it from your siblings easier. But when you're younger, I feel like I see more vaping, which I think is where it's a big like issue to talk about prevention because it's starting earlier and earlier and earlier. But then again, once you hit high school, I think it's just everything all across the board, and whatever you have access to is kind of what's popular.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because to me, I just assumed, whatever I saw, because personally, I mean, I'm not a user, but from what I see, when I was in junior high, it was definitely more nicotine products. And then I just assumed that kind of dropped out of the trend. So when I got into high school, started seeing more THC products. I thought it was a trend thing, but it does make sense that it could also just be an accessibility thing.
Yeah.
Have you, like, when you talk to people who use nicotine versus THC, do the people who use THC, they have the same, does it have the same mental effects as the nicotine does? Because I see a lot of people who think it doesn't. Like, they just think it's fine and it doesn't affect them the same way. But, is there similar effects?
That's a great question. I get that a lot, too. It's like, well, but now I use THC because it's not as bad, or, all these people say it's becoming more and more illegal. Yeah, there's, all this confusion around that. You're right. There are some physical differences between the way that nicotine and vaping affects a teen versus how using marijuana or THC will affect a teen. But when it comes to where a teen's brain is at and their development, and when it comes to their mental health, it looks practically the same. So maybe that word addiction is where people draw a black and white line. You can get really addicted to vaping, but you can't get addicted to THC or marijuana. In my field of mental health, the way we talk about substance use, we talk about substance use disorders as a mental health experience. And the definition of a substance use disorder is practically the same as addiction. And that is what we use to explain when somebody has a dependency on THC or marijuana. And kind of like I told you before, you have that cycle of I maybe don't feel good, so I use a drug, and then I don't feel good. What comes first? They just interact with each other. That's what happens with THC and marijuana, where it starts to become a dependency, or it looks exactly like an addiction. It's this is what I do to get through the day, or this is what I do to deal with stress. And so then it does become this dependency. I cannot do the next thing. I cannot, get through the day. The definition of addiction is doing something, a substance that gives you an immediate reward, even though it's harming you and there's negative consequences. You're doing it even though it's having bad effects. And that is the same thing that happens with THC marijuana. It's you still use it even though it's having all these negative effects on you. So yes and no, I think that they really marry each other and look really similar. But some people have decided to say, well, because it's less addictive than vaping, it's fine for you. but I would disagree. So.
And you mentioned like in your job description, like assessing like addiction is like part of it. So what does that process look like, and how do those conversations typically go when you're dealing with youth?
There's a lot of particular things to look for when it comes to, am I dependent on a substance or am I addicted? A lot of them have to do with like, have I ever said, I'm only going to do this much and I did more? Or I said, I'm only going to do it this many days and I did it for more days. Or I'm only going to do it for a couple minutes and then I did it for 2 hours. That's one thing we're looking for. Another thing we're looking for is, are there negative consequences that happen, but you still decide to use anyways? Whether that's my grades are going down, I'm missing school, my relationships in my family are going bad, maybe relationships with friends are going bad. If there are negative consequences and you're still making that decision, that's another thing that we're looking for. There's also a lot of things to look for, like periods of time and how long and those kind of things. But those are probably the two big ones. Have you ever tried to quit and then you couldn't? You know, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, everybody tries to quit and they can't. But that's one of the indicators of dependency or addiction. So those are some of the things that we screen for when I look for that. I'm also looking for, I'm asking those questions like, do you ever feel a negative feeling and then decide to vape or use? And that's a big one for me too. Versus, you know, when am I making the decision socially? Am I making the decision based off an emotion, based off a thought? So those things are really important too when assessing and diagnosing those kind of things.
It's interesting to hear like from the scientific way of like how addiction starts and how that process is so quick before you even notice like some of these drastic effects. But you specifically, like in your field, like when you're looking for those, you know, bigger indications like of addiction, it's just interesting to like separate how that process is probably going like scientifically, you know, because they're using these products not as frequently at the beginning, but this is like when the process of addiction is beginning. So I don't know, it's just really cool to hear the other side of it, because we always, you know, hear, oh, it only takes so many hits or so many seconds for this process to begin, but just hearing like how that starts becoming like part of behavior is really like interesting to like hear from the different
I guess I didn't realize, or like most people probably don't, that it was such a convoluted process. Like there's not just, it's either you're addicted or you're not, which is how I've always seen it, but it's not. Like there's all these different things, and that's, I had no idea. Like it kind of blows my mind that it's just that complicated, and I didn't even think to consider that.
I do kind of feel like a detective in that way. I have to look for little indicators, because on the surface it might not look like addiction or dependency, but it might be really close, you know, and looking for things like, when I'm in class, like I'm just thinking about the next time, like, ooh, that turns on like puts up a flag in my brain, like, okay, you know, your brain while you're doing math is thinking about that, you know, why is that, you know, so that dependency is building. Yeah, it is weird. I'm glad that you said it like that. It's not black and white. It's not you're addicted or you're not. It's that process that happens.
Once you go through the process and you determine like somebody has an addiction or problem, what does the next step look like? How do you start making, like they decide they want to quit? How do you do, like, what do you do first?
Yeah. So my role, I'm a mental health therapist, right? So there's all these things that they should be doing probably with parents and teachers and all these like physical health stuff that they can do in order to quit. My job and my role is to focus on mental and emotional. This is actually good for people to know, because if you want to help a friend, you can do these same things that I do in therapy with my clients. And it's figuring out, okay, what thoughts, feelings, and relationships lead to you using. You know, is it a stress feeling? Is it anytime I feel rejected or uninvited? Or is it anytime I feel worried about something? We like log, like journal. Like, okay, for the next 2 weeks, every time you think of it or you want to do it or you do it, write down who, what, where, when, why, what color shirt were you wearing? Were you eating pineapple? Like, I want to find any kind of pattern that's going on in your mental health. Because then when we decide, okay, we're quitting, and a moment comes up like, oh man, I'm really stressed. Oh, I knew that the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to want to vape. Me and Leanne already prepped, like, I'm going to go walk a lap, or I'm going to call up my friend and chat about gaming. I don't know, that they can kind of prepare. So that's kind of what I do is I focus on the mental health of it, so that they don't get stuck in that cycle. Because what's going to happen is when they decide to stop vaping, they're going to have a withdrawal symptom, which is depression and anxiety. And they're going to be like, dang, what do I do with this depression and anxiety? Well, what did I do before? Oh, I used. And so I don't have anything to replace that. So I guess I'll just use again. So I prepare them for that moment. What can you do instead when you get that low mental moment? Because that's so intertwined with their using. So
Yeah. And I think, so my biggest struggle, like dealing with that, like helping friends, I think, and I kind of want to talk to you about, is that sense of denial. So I definitely understand like what you're saying. Like once we have both already established that we're dealing with addiction, like what are those next steps? Like what can we do? But I feel like a lot of the time there's just this denial that it's addiction or, like substance, abuse or reliance and stuff like that. So how do you go about that? Like, how do you approach those conversations to just acknowledge the fact that there is something to be dealt with in the first place?
yeah, that part's really tough because you dig your friend. I'm assuming if they're your friend, or you dig this person and you just like want what's best for them. But denial is a heavy, big thing, and it can blind all sorts of stuff. My number one advice, especially when it comes to teens, this is different advice than what I'd give to parents or teachers or principals, is teens are like you're so much more helpful than adults are when it comes to this moment. And so what your friend needs is a peer and not another parent, teacher, police officer, etc., which can be hard because in your mind you're like, bro, I want to throw away your vape and I want to lock you up and we're going to play Uno, so you can just not do that. But what they need from you is just friends. So communicate to them. I think the best you can do in regards to calling them out and helping them with that denial is to communicate how it affects your friendship. You're like, hey, just so you know, sometimes I feel like totally ditched by you because you were flaky because of blank, because of using or blah, blah, blah. Or like, just so you know, I'm worried about you. Like in college, I want to have a grand old time and I'm worried that you're going to be, stuck vaping and like thinking about the next hit and we can't have a great time. Like I want you to be there for me and I want to be there for you. Here's how this is affecting me, and try to be there as a friend or a peer rather than as a parent, adult, or police officer. And then maybe if you feel like it's appropriate, send them to the appropriate parent, police officer, teacher, therapist. That's what the therapy room is for, is dealing with that denial, is helping them to overcome that. Like therapists are trained to help somebody to see that. So that's what I would say is the next best thing you could do, is help them to go to somebody who can help them with the denial. You just help them with the friend part, the here's how it affects me part. So send them my way.
No, yeah, I hear you for sure. And I think that's really important to keep in mind just going forward, because I know that's such a touchy topic because, I mean, we're fortunate. Like, we were able to be, like, educated, and we just had that awareness brought to our attention before we were, susceptible or we're in the right place at the right time and, peer pressured or anything like that. So,
yeah. You can still, tell them, hey, here are the facts. Like,
True.
Look at this say what content and what, it says about all this stuff. Like, you can still kind of give it to them that way. But, yeah, in regards to denial, your role might only go so far.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about, like, having it come from a friend specifically, because they would kind of know what kind of communication you're receptive to. So, like one of my friends may need the facts to be like, oh, wait. Or some of them, may need a different approach. So
yes,
that's just another reason, like as a friend, why you would want to be the one, to kind of just share that concern at least, with your peer.
I'm not sure if I recommend this as a way to help your friends, but I had a client and he told me when I was asking him what would help when it comes to like helping your friends quit, because he was addicted. He was addicted for 1.5 years. And then he wasn't, and he was able to quit, and it was really awesome. And I was asking him, like, what helps? And he was like, you know what? Just tell your friends it's embarrassing, like lame, like you look stupid. And I was like writing this down. I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about this advice. But I realized like that's totally his personality. And that was him and his friends' vibes. He's like, so now whenever my friends think to do it, I say, that is embarrassing. And I was like, okay, maybe you could have more support. But I think he gets his friends and his friend gets him, and they know how to communicate with each other. And I actually think that helps them, that they're like, dude, really? And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, lame. Yeah, whatever, Or, your friend like, oh, no, she needs to hear the facts. Or oh, she needs me to like hug her and feed her gummy sour worms and talk about how much I love her and say, you got to stop this. So, yes, I love that you said that. Like, exactly what your friend needs, and you can give to the language, where maybe parents, teachers, even therapists, it's a little bit more professional and formal. Maybe it doesn't reach them
by
like
the
a peer
book, maybe.
does. By the book,
exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I like that you point out that like it's that he told them it was embarrassing. Yeah. There is something like we get the thing where like vaping is cool and teens think it's super cool, but if we could get to a point where we like flip that, where people start to think that it's not cool anymore, and the more we talk about how bad it is, we can start like changing the way we see it. Because as teens, we are so like dialed into what makes me look like, what is the right image here? Like, I want to look cool. I don't want to be like, it's very, I don't know what it's like for adults. I'm sure they have that too, but like, I'm constantly feeling the pressure to be like, you got to be like this because this is what people want to see. And so if we start like talking about, the more we talk about how bad these products are and start changing people's ideas of what they think, I think that's a really kind of interesting take on this.
It's reminding me of cigarettes. Cigarettes had that evolution. It used to be like, this is really cool. And then somewhere in like 2005, 10-year-olds started like coughing at random old men at the street. I'm not sure if you ever did that when you were a kid and you saw somebody on the street smoking a cigarette and you're like, oh, that's so lame. So you'd be like, your smoke is making me sick. Like, it was cool to shame cigarette smokers. It sounds like you're looking for that same shift in vaping. Now all kids are like, that's bad for you. Like, we've been informed,
Well, because it is like some of my friends, like the people I talk to at school, they think of smoking, like cigarette smoking, it's gross. Like, that's gross. Like, you don't want to touch that. Yeah. It's even the same thing like with the dip versus the Zyn thing. Like, the dip was gross. Like, you don't want to put that, depending on where you are, like it's just like kind of yucky. But these products now, those are cool. But I'm interested to see if it takes that kind of same vibe, if we start seeing that those are now the gross products.
In marketing, they're even like, okay, sure, cigarettes are bad, but vaping is
cute.
Yeah.
And that's the point. That's where the marketing tactics come in. And that's what caught me off guard. We just had this conversation not too long ago with Zyn. I, with being here, like I'd say I was educated before it really blew up, but I did not anticipate that it was going to be that popular among youth, specifically like high school, middle school, because I thought it was too close to dip, which I feel like mostly as a generation that was a common, consumption. Like we're not rocking with the chewing tobacco, so I thought Zyn would be too close, and I was completely wrong. But that can also be like a convenience thing that we also kind of talk about. It's just convenient. So, but I actually wanted to mention something about the social media thing, or like as a generation. I have started to see on TikTok that there has kind of been a shift in how we talk about vapes. So what I'll see is vape users comedically like admitting their addiction, but it's almost like they're admitting that they're addicted and they're aware, but it has like a funny spin off to it. And then you'll see in the comments, you do start to have some of that, girl, like, like we're leaving that, and which can be positive. But in another sense, we are also still promoting it in a weird way because at the end of the day, you're still going to be like an influencer in your own way, and someone may look at that as comfort. Like, okay, well, I'm not the only one, so it's so like backhanded sometimes because it's being promoted, but it's also being acknowledged. So it's like really, you have to be kind of careful.
It's like reverse psychology.
I know, right? It's really interesting to think about and see how that's been taking over social media. But something else, just kind of like moving down the line. So let's say that, you have a client and we assess the addiction and we're working through it. And we've hit a point where we think that we've kind of got over the hump.
Okay.
So I just kind of want to hear like what your experience with like reoccurrence is like, and how like I guess youth deal with that, and just kind of like how they explain what that's like to you, because that relapse kind of thing, I feel like what does the timeline of that look like? Like how long do you think, or have you typically seen that kind of pattern to repeat?
You know, I wish I could give you an answer, but I think it's different for every teen.
Really?
I would say maybe there's more of a pattern when it comes to how young they started. So if they started in middle school or junior high, that maybe the relapse is going to happen more often and it's going to be harder. Whereas some of the clients I've seen that started in high school realize, oh, wow, this is a problem. I want to fix it. It was easier to be able to quit for good. I think is what you're talking about, right? Like relapsing versus quitting for good versus, I would say everybody's so different. But I think the biggest pattern is how early you started. And how early you started has all sorts of negative effects on teenager brain, adult life, and all that kind of stuff. But that's what I would say is maybe the main pattern. And then the level of support. So if I've got a teen who's like, ooh, I want to stop this, but he's got no friends who are on his team, no family maybe that's there to kind of walk him through it, or unsupportive school staff that don't believe in them, then they're going to have more relapses and maybe more problems. But the teens that tell me like, oh yeah, another teen actually, me and my girlfriend were quitting together.
Wow.
So quick. And from what I know, haven't started back up again. So, so I think the difference is how early you started and how good your support team is, too. That's big, which is why I think us talking about all this and, like, how can we be a good support is so important, too, that really, really helps.
So, like, you see there's, like, the trend is how early they start. When kids are really young, what do you think the best way to start talking to them about these kinds of products are? Because, like, in middle school, I didn't know about vapes or what they were until like way past what everybody else did. But like, and so if somebody had come to me before I finally figured it out, I probably would have been like, I wouldn't have known anything.
Yeah.
But like, what are some of the best ways to talk? Because talking to the younger kids can be really hard. Like, I don't want to be the one to like bring them into that by telling them about the product, but I also want to be able to explain to them what it is without making them interested in it. You know what I mean? Like, how do you start that?
Well, I think actually the first thing that popped in my brain was that it's you and not maybe me and adults who are first talking to them. Like, how cool would that be if it was high schoolers or middle schoolers, if we're talking to elementary schools, or people just in college that are talking? So I think maybe that relational, like, kind of understand, like, hey, I was you just not too long ago, and oh, hey, I'm you in 5 years. I think that's probably the best way, is to get their peers or people not just much older than them talking to them. If it's going to be an adult, that's a good question. How am I talking to them in a way where it has the same effect that cigarette advertising has on kids, where they're like, oh, yeah, that is gross. Like, I'm going to cough at people on the street. I think it's just getting more and more education sooner. I really do think that will be more preventative than lead to it happening more. If they get more of the facts and they say, oh, gross, or oh, ew, or oh, scary, then, I think that'll help. But I just think we're all behind. Like, we're all still learning. Plenty of adults still don't know how this stuff works, right? Yeah. So who was there to teach you guys about, what it was? So I think we're just got to get ahead of the research and the facts and get it in sooner. Just like, get into adult schools.
And I think it's really interesting that you, like, expressed that concern, because I'm sure that there are, like, other people who are in their advocacy journey that may feel that way, kind of frightened. But I don't think anyone's immune to that type of part of our society. Like, they're going to be exposed to it.
Especially
one way
with social media.
Exactly.
And
so,
the vape videos you're talking about.
Exactly. So whether it's like social media or whatever it may be, I think it's just what kind of light is it shed in when they are exposed to it is what's going to kind of really impact how they look at that product and how they make those decisions moving forward. Yeah. So I definitely appreciate that you shared that, because
that's a good question.
Yeah, I'm sure other people may feel that way, but that's why it's so important, like, to be an advocate and to however it may look to you, share your story.
Yeah.
In that way.
What's popping in my head too is, and maybe I take back some of the things I said, like let's get it in schools and show them how gross and scary it is. Maybe I take that back though, because scare tactics don't work, and that people have used that since the 80s, like you're going to be like this person on the screen, scare tactics don't work. So yeah, but just the facts, right? Like, and hey, this is what it is. This is what we know. That's helpful. But yeah, I do want to clarify, like, scare tactics don't work. Even though that's what I want to do. I want to scare people, but
But I mean, the facts are scary. So it's like
scary.
You don't have to, you don't
have to do much.
Yeah, you don't have to do much. Like, genuinely, just really sitting back and looking at the facts and like what's proven, the proven effects, and I mean the same thing like with the different truth commercials you'll see. They're like, they'll put someone who has been a user for a certain amount of time, tell their story and how that it personally affected them. And that's terrifying. But
for sure.
I mean, intentionally or not, like it does get the job done. But I do understand how to be, sensitive about that type of thing. So
one of the most really effective like little assemblies I saw in a school once was an adult giving this assembly about like vape prevention. But then they also had somebody in their class come out and like share about somebody in their family who'd been affected by drugs. And that was really powerful too. So yeah, the story is like enough. Just like hearing from somebody else and what they experienced. It gives you those facts. So.
Yeah. And that just goes all into like that support that you were talking about and just talking about it, bringing awareness to it. It just goes a long way. So it's really interesting.
When we talk about talking about it with young kids, like especially with some of the adults I've seen, is like how young is too young? Like, is it ever too soon to talk about it? Or when would you think the right time to start those kinds of conversations? What age?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I'm necessarily like have all of maybe this experience and professional background. Maybe people who've done more research than me, or people in schools might maybe know more than me. But I'm a big proponent on just if you're in a trusted, supportive relationship with somebody or with a kid, whenever they see it, the first time it's seen, I think you can talk to a kid about it, or the first time they ask a question. So whenever that is, 3, 8, so that you're the first, that there's a positive first intervention when it comes to seeing that kind of stuff. I don't know. That's a good question, though. I'm not sure if I'm the one who has, like, the professional opinion on that. But that's my first thought. The first time it's asked about or seen,
like,
maybe.
Pay attention and see when they think they start to see it and then address it then. That makes sense.
Yeah, I personally think that's always evolving, like depending on the demographic or like what
where you are,
what you have access to,
the state of society and the community. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you mentioned like working through these, addiction plans or just like the journaling. You mentioned like taking a lap around. What are some more examples that you have seen like become successful in some of the youth that you might have dealt with to kind of mitigate that?
So after you make that plan, deciding what you're gonna do, like an action plan, like replacers. A lot of people talk about replacers, talk about like gum or, having something to put in your mouth. So those are like the physical things. The next thing I see really helpful is like, okay, if I've tracked when I feel down, when I feel bad, or when I'm lonely or whatever, having a plan to what we call cope ahead. Like, okay, I don't even have to decide in the moment what I'm going to do. I already decided ahead of time. I want to vape at night or I want to use THC at night. So now every night I have the best dang night routine. I got all the lotions. I watch my favorite show. I call my favorite friend. So that coping ahead skill to help deal with those moments where you're tempted to relapse or do something again. That's probably the next thing. And then after that, getting a really big team. Okay, who are your friends? Okay, which parent do you trust the most to talk about? Who's a teacher? And just like making that support group really, really big, because just me and them alone is not enough, especially since I see them like 1 hour a week, or every other week. So getting that support team really, really big, which is tied to what I said earlier about what's the biggest influence on being able to quit and quit forever. It's how big your support team is. So that would probably be the next thing that we work on. So.
And this is pure curiosity, like you specifically in your in your position, do you ever have the opportunity to address the support system of a youth? Like, do you ever have the opportunity to talk to a parent and kind of describe what that may look like? And if so, how does that conversation go?
Yes, yeah. I prefer it. I prefer like being in contact, especially with the family. I don't think I've ever talked to a client's friend. That would be cool. I would like that. Like, okay, here's their plan. Okay, here's what you're gonna do. Get them a blue Gatorade at this moment. Blah blah blah. That would be really fun. But I definitely have contact with family and parents, and a lot of that is parent coaching. On parents are really scared to see you guys use vaping or marijuana. They're like scared out of their minds. They have worst case scenarios. So biggest part of my job is turning them into the best kind of support for my client, helping them to regulate their own emotions, helping them to know what the plan is, helping them to know it might not work right away, helping them to know what kind of skills would help with this teen. Hey, they told me it's anxiety. So here's some things that help with anxiety. You have these things ready too when they're anxious. That's kind of what that looks like. Love effort. That part. Yeah, team effort, 100%. Yeah.
Forgive me. I hope you don't have to repeat anything. But so we briefly touched on like THC and like what that looks like and how some misconceptions about that. We actually just briefly talked about before you even got here what in different demographics the perception of like marijuana use and all of that looks like. So some opinions are, you know, like, well, yeah, in my demographic and my like area of living, like everyone's very aware, you know, that you know, marijuana is bad or that's harmful this way or not in this way, you know? Like what do those, how that differs? Because personally personally in my experience, that's not even a conversation. Like I feel like we finally hit like, okay, nicotine products, tobacco products, yeah, we have established. But now it's this whole, but these marijuana products aren't harmful at all. There's no research to, you know, back all that up. So I just kind of want to see like, from you, because, you know, you're directly working with a lot of different kind of youth from different demographics and such. So how has that opinion varied and like how do you delegate that conversation?
Oh, yeah. I think that a lot of teens, maybe with older siblings or older cousins, I mean, even older uncles, aunts, and parents are in an environment where like, oh, yeah, marijuana's fine. You know, this is good. It relaxes me. It helps me deal with stress. It's a good time. It, you know, it makes me, you know, A, B, or C. And so for teens, that's what they are realizing is like, okay, so this is fine for adults and it's even legal for adults. And vaping is going to be legal when I'm 18. So I think that there's a lot of teens that if they're in that environment, there's kind of this experience of like, why is everybody shaming me for doing it? This is just fine. And then anytime somebody is trying to say, hey, you shouldn't do this, they're like, oh no, look, my whole neighborhood does this. It's normal. It's fine. It's hard to feel motivated to be like, oh, why would this be not good for me? And I think you're right. I think that that's a pattern of if that's not the community or environment you're in, you're not thinking about it as much. But if you are, it's like hard to find motivators to not to, because if adults can do it, then why can't I? Like you're just treating me like I'm a kid now, or like I'm silly. That's probably the most common thing maybe I'm seeing in session is this can't be a big deal because adults can do it. And that's where maybe, that's where definitely the difference in a teen brain and an adult brain is vital when it comes to here. I can't speak to, I mean, the law's the law, whatever you're allowed to do when you turn a certain age. But I can speak to that a teen brain is just different than an adult brain in a lot of really great ways, actually. Having a teen brain is awesome. I mean, that's why people write songs about being teenagers. That's why everybody's like, oh, when I was in high school, it's because teen brain is awesome. You know, it's like not a bad thing, but it's at a different state than an adult brain. So I think that's probably the biggest, I don't know, one of the biggest conflicts that comes up when it comes to seeing your community be okay with it versus not be okay with it.
What would you suggest for like, so somebody who isn't in a community that is okay with it and they see like a friend who is, how would you suggest, like, what would you recommend they do to try to broach that subject to the friend without like, you don't want to make them like be upset at their family, but how do you talk to them about that without causing?
Yeah, I mean, maybe in that situation, I mean, first that's tough. It's like, you against their whole growing up, you know, or their whole community. But maybe that's a really good moment to say, like, hey, just so you know, like, there's a reason there's laws against this for us at our age. Like, here's some things about our brain, or here's some things about how it affects us if we start now, and how it'll affect us when we're 25 versus if somebody did it when they were 40 for the first time. Like, it really, really harms us. And maybe that's just giving them the facts, and then giving them, hey, this is how it affects me, seeing you do this. But that's tough because you're working against a lot of history.
Almost.
The culture.
That's the thing I've seen the most is when, and just for certain people, like marijuana use has been embraced as a culture thing.
Like a part of who they are almost at a certain point, and they
Like
just...
It's on T-shirts, right?
Yeah.
It's on sweatshirts. It's on sweatpants. But that's a good thing to talk about in therapy, right? That's where somebody needs to decide, like, okay, what part of my culture do I want to hold on to, and for what reasons? And what parts am I willing to let go? And kind of overcoming some of those things. That's a good therapy thing, for sure.
So just to like recap and like summary, so when you encounter someone who is expressing like that marijuana use is like something that they're dealing
normal.
with, and so naturally you try and touch on, I guess, how that impacts like them specifically, like development wise. Is that kind of so like what or like what is your response when you find out that okay, they're using this substance? So like what is the first thing that you would say?
Yeah, if I'm using this substance and everybody older than me uses this substance, when I turn 18, I'm still going to use this substance. If I come across something like that, that's where we talk about like where your brain is at as a teen. And one kind of metaphor to help you understand that is, like I said, teen brain's really cool. Being a teen is cool because a lot of things are still so new. Things are really exciting. Things are more exciting when you're experiencing them for the first time than when you're experiencing them, you know, for a million times. It's kind of the same as like a 1-year-old. I'm not sure if you've been around a 1-year-old much, but they get stoked on peekaboo. You know what I mean? Like, peekaboo, really? Peekaboo? Like, that's lame, right? But 1-year-olds think it's the coolest thing they've ever seen. They see a tag on the chair. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But I would not give a 1-year-old like a 12-ounce can of orange soda. I just know, like, dude, that 1-year-old needs milk. He needs whole milk and some water. Because I know that 1-year-old's growing. Yeah. That just seems really obvious to us. It's the same for teens, right? Teens are in this awesome learning period. They're experiencing all these things. I'm not giving that teen nicotine, and I'm not giving them THC because it affects the way you're going to learn in that period. It really affects the way you deal with life's ups and downs, i.e. your mental health. If you start using, if you're vaping or if you're using marijuana underneath the age of 17, you are more likely to have mental health problems as an adult. Or you're more likely to have dependency problems as an adult. I mean, that's where all the research comes in, right? All these facts of like, if a teen uses, the repercussions are huge compared to other populations. So that's kind of where we start, is like, hey, I know you see Uncle so-and-so doing it, and I know you see, you know, neighbors over 18 doing it, but let me help you know what that means for you as a teen.
And that's like one of the first place where those two things collide, is that whatever the different chemical makeup of it is, we're still dealing with similar issues, that they're still going to trigger some of these negative side effects at the end, you know, farther down the road. So that's kind of what I was, thank you for that, because that's kind of what I was getting at.
Oh, yeah.
And so I know you talked about earlier about like people who are working on quitting and the things that you give, they figure out what they're going to do to help them stop. But like, what are some ways that like people who haven't started yet, what are some good ways to like start thinking about doing things to help prevent you from getting there? Like, what can people who aren't there yet but worry that they could eventually?
Or does that look similar?
Yeah, does it look similar? Is it the same process? Or
the question you're asking is, how do you prepare and make sure that your mental health is good so you don't get to a point where you're using, or is that what you're asking?
I think so. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm getting at. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Well, I mean, the first is educate. Educate yourself. Get as much information as possible. The next thing I would say when it comes to like being good and in a place where you're not going to like make the decision to use, whether that's vaping or THC or marijuana, is make sure you've got good I guess the general way to say this is like, make sure your mental health is good. Okay. And what mental health is it's your ability to handle life's ups and downs. If you notice yourself when life's ups and downs happens and you're getting stuck, you're like, I can't do this. Like, whoa, red flag. So to make sure your mental health is good, like you got, okay, where are my feelings? Where are my thoughts? And where are my relationships? If you're keeping your feelings in check, if you've got good way to regulate your feelings, you've got good way to deal with down days, if you've got positive thoughts, if you've got positive relationships, you're way less likely to decide to vape, use marijuana, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I'm high on life. As cheesy as that sounds, right? Like life is going good. I know how to deal with an up and down. I'm not going to decide to use this thing to deal with an up or down, if that makes sense. That would be the first thing I would say. Get your mental health in check. But again, that's where I'm coming from, right? As a therapist, that's where I see my biggest, like, okay, if people's mental health were better, like this would be maybe less of a problem. But I know that other professionals will say a bunch of other things when it comes to physically preparing yourself, socially preparing yourself, and all that kind of stuff.
Just to digest a little bit more into that, because sometimes I think that line between good and bad mental health can be fuzzy, right? Because natural human response is to like have feelings and to react a certain type of way. So could you almost give me like an example of what would a healthy response and a not healthy response would be? Because sometimes I can...
Yes, I'm glad that you asked that. So for example, let's say you have a really bad day for whatever reason. If your mental health is good, it's kind of like, dang, that was a bad day. I got this. I'm going to figure this out. I'm still cool. I'm still like, I can make this work. Bad mental health is like bad day. And it's like, I have to give up. I cannot do this. I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, it's like the I can versus I can't. If the way that you're responding to a bad day is like, I can't, it's over, we're done, I'm screwed, or I can't handle it, that's an inability to deal with life's ups and downs. You can still say like, today sucked and I am sad and I'm going to be sad and I'm going to listen to sad music for the rest of the night. But tomorrow I'm really excited to do A, B, and C. That's what I mean by like your mental health is good. You can take a down comes and you still got good thoughts and you can still rely on good relationships and you still know how to maybe turn it around. Yeah, it's not like everything's always happy and I'm always happy.
Yeah.
It's maybe more of a mindset of like, I believe I'm going to be good and I know I can handle it.
That's so interesting, like genuinely, because I feel like sometimes it's more portrayed more black and white than that. So it's like that's the first time I ever really understood what good mental health looks like.
Yeah.
Because to me it was just, oh, bad mental health, like, okay, you're depressed, like you're dealing like like to an extreme almost. But with you just saying that, like even me right now, I feel like, well, maybe I need to work on that too, like truly, because I mean, as a college student, especially in April, if you know, you know.
You're drowning.
Drowning. But just your natural response is your natural response to go, this is like, you know, down, or is your natural response to be like, but on the right side, you know, like at the end of the day, I'm going to be okay. Like just that contentness. Like, so what is something that you would suggest just to anyone on how to naturally, I guess, be aware of that and how to negate and delegate that? Like, what is something that you would suggest to kind of make sure that your mental health is in check?
For sure. I think the first thing is just pay attention. You know, now that you know, okay, my mental health is the way that I'm thinking about it, pay attention to like, what's my first like response? Like when I have something bad happen, what's the first thought? You are allowed to be like, oh wow, a horrible thing happened, like this is horrible. That's okay. But then what's my next thought? And then what's my next one? Like, where does it go? Like, what trail does my thoughts follow? That might be a good way to take a temperature. It might take some time. You might kind of have to, like, really pay attention because it's hard to, like, stop and be like, what did I just think there? Like,
right?
That's not very easy.
Yeah.
But, like, take a temperature. And then the next thing would be really pay attention to when I have a down day, ups and downs in life. I have a down day. What is the way that I respond? Because good mental health is using coping skills. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that, like, use good coping skills to help you to feel happy and not depressed and anxious. But technically, everybody uses coping skills when you have a bad day. Some are just better than others. So if you want to make sure that you're keeping your mental health good, your feelings, your thoughts, your relationships, pay attention to, when I have a bad day, what's the thing I pick to do? Is it, oh my gosh, this sucks, I'm going to go on my phone and I'm going to scroll. Oh my gosh, this sucks, I'm going to go underneath a blanket and turn on Netflix and watch Gilmore Girls again. Versus, oh wow, I'm going to call up a friend and make plans for this weekend so I have something to look forward to. Versus, oh wait, I've got volleyball tonight, I'm going to go and play my heart out and just get lost in volleyball. When it comes to dealing with your mental health, it's kind of like a meal. You've got appetizers, and you've got main course, and then you've got desserts. And all parts are very important for the meal, right? Appetizers are because you're so dang hungry that you literally cannot wait for the restaurant to bring out your meal. Give me a roll right now. Like, put some butter on that roll. I need it right now just to, like, solve my hunger, right?
Yeah.
Main course is, this is going to last me through the rest of the day. Like, this is going to keep me full for the rest of the night. It's going to nourish me. It's going to give me the energy I need for tomorrow. And a dessert is like, oh, this is fun. This is like, and it makes me feel really good really fast, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm hungry, I'm not sure if you're like this, sometimes if I'm hungry, I might go for a dessert first because I know that's going to satisfy me the best. I'll have like a couple chocolate-covered almonds, and then I'll have my quesadilla, whatever. The way you respond to a down day should mirror that. So for example, if when I have a down day, all I'm doing is desserts, like my phone or a TV show, it feels good really quickly. Right? And it tastes the best, honestly, out of all the coping skills. That phone, that's the funny videos on there, right? But too much dessert isn't going to fix, it's not going to like nourish you or heal you. What you need is a main course.
Might even make you feel worse after.
It will even make you feel worse if you do too much, right? And appetizers just not enough, maybe. That appetizers are for like if you're in the middle of a test and you're like, I can't do this. You might like, okay, take 10 breaths, you know. That's my appetizer. It gets me through my test. I don't have time to go play volleyball during my test. I don't have time to call a friend. That gets me just through the moment, where my main course is going to be some kind of coping skill that like gets me through the ups and downs and gets me to the next day. And I think a lot of the reason people are surprised, like, why is my mental health so bad? Well, it's because you're only eating desserts to help. You're only doing things that maybe distract you from your hunger and then make you feel really gross and bad and have all these negative effects afterwards. So that would be my number one advice. Okay, I want my mental health to be in check. I don't want to get to this point where I rely on nicotine or THC. Let me make sure I've got main courses that I'm doing every day that fill my life up and fill me up so I can handle the ups and downs. That's probably my advice.
Love that. I genuinely love that.
Was good.
Because that was definitely like a huge misconception for me. And then especially social media, our generation, whatever you want to call it, like mental health is thrown like a lot of different ways, which is great that we're bringing awareness and we're trying to be more aware of it. But at the same time, are we really sitting down and digesting what that looks like? Like, I have a mental health day, but like, you know, like, are we really sitting there and digesting the cause and the source and the root? So
I will be the first to say I've accidentally taken mental health days where I sat on my phone and watched Netflix all day. I thought that was mental health day. I just ate dessert all day. It didn't really help. Then I went back to work and I still felt crappy. So if you're going to take a mental health day, right, go on a walk, you know, talk to your mom for 30 minutes on the phone and you're in the kitchen or whatever, you know, eat meals all day to then get you through the rest of the ups and downs. And I will say this, dessert's great. Like, I'm not saying don't eat ice cream, you know, just make sure maybe you had an appetizer and a meal that day before you have some dessert. I love ending the day with a little 15 minutes of like, what are my friends doing on social media? That's good, you know, but past a certain amount of time, it's like, oh, I'm going to barf, right? This is too much. It's not good. So, you know, they all have their place, but good mental health is when you know where your main courses need to be, for sure. And main courses are really good replacers for vaping. If you ever need to quit something, then think, okay, what's a main course coping skill? That's a good thing to do instead of using a drug or something.
And then along with the topic of mental health, therapy specifically. So, because some people, you know, it's been said, like, everyone needs a little bit of therapy. So, like, What is your stance on that? What do you think
Yeah.
it's most helpful for? Like, who should really be like leaning towards that? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think whenever you're handling the ups and downs, when it comes to ups and downs and you're having a hard time handling it, that might be a good indicator of like, A, I need to use more main course coping skills, or B, maybe I look into going to therapy. Obviously, therapy is for those who need to be assessed, diagnosed, and treated. So if you're experiencing clinical depression and clinical anxiety, which is, these depression and anxieties that don't go away, that last for 2 weeks or longer. Those are like maybe the obvious, like, okay, go and consider going into therapy. But one of my biggest mottos is you do not need to have a mental health diagnosis in order to deserve emotional support, like, or in order to get help. Like, everybody is suffering and everybody deserves help. So even if you kind of feel like, well, I don't have clinical depression and sometimes I deal with the ups and downs, but sometimes I don't, like, should I go? Go. Everybody needs emotional support. Hopefully your therapist should be good enough to like meet with you and be like, okay, great, let's just meet for a couple times and then you're good. Or like, oh no, wait, let's make your treatment plan a little bit longer. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question. It's kind of a little bit of everything, but everybody deserves emotional support. So if you're thinking about going to therapy, I say, and if you have the means, sometimes you might not have the means, I say go. And if you don't have the means to go to a therapist outside of your school, go check in with your counselor at your school. And they can maybe let you know, like, oh, wait, maybe we just meet a couple of times. Or, oh, wait, let's figure out if you need, they can help you make that decision.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. And I think that kind of ties back into like the emotional support thing too, because I mean, obviously not the book definition or qualifications of like a therapist, but you ever like have that one good talk with your best friend and it's like, ooh, like I needed that. Like I needed to let that off my chest. Like I definitely can understand how just talking in general and just having that support from another human being can just be beneficial. And it's a way of therapy, but obviously.
Again, your friend knows you. Maybe your friend might be like, okay, I can only help you so much. I actually feel like you need more help. They might be able to say, maybe we should look into one more step because they can see you from the outside and they know you best and they love you. So, yeah, that's great. Yeah, just talking it out.
Even right now, I just
right? Let's just take a breath for a second. This does feel good,
like,
right?
I just like completely had a whole revolution on mental health and what that's like.
I do. So, like the way you talk about mental health, it's eye-opening and it's really impressive that you're able to explain it that way. Is that like, did somebody explain it to you that way first? Is this something you've like figured out the best way to explain it through experience? Like, where did you get like? It's just impressive, and I'm curious to see how you got to be able to do that so well.
Learning from other really great therapists, and going to my own therapy, I think, as well. But then, honestly, I think a lot of it came to because I'm an adult. I won't say how old I am, but I'm an adult, right? And so I've been learning this for a while, and when I prepare to present to teens, whether it's in therapy or at school, I'm thinking, how can I say this in a way that it makes sense? I think to a 5-year-old, And so I've actually done a lot of work on trying to simplify it because, what the heck is mental health?
Yeah.
And people are talking about it all the time. It's like a buzzword. And so actually I think I've done a lot of research and a lot of study and okay, if I want to like talk to one of my teens in therapy about this, I can explain it in my like Leanne language, like how do I say this in a way that it makes sense to anybody of any age? So I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and I think that's also helped my own understanding too. I'm like, oh, yeah, dang, I've been eating way too much dessert lately. Now I'm seeing my mental health is not as good as I thought it was. I'm not even taking my own medicine.
Yeah.
So I think through trying to help others understand it, that's where it was like, oh wow, now I mean, people say like, if you want to understand something, teach it to somebody, and so I think that's helped me a ton.
Have you always worked with like adolescents with you?
Pretty much. Are you asking if I've always worked with that population?
Yes.
Adolescents? Yeah. Sometimes I've seen some adults, and I've actually worked with like little kids too. Play therapy that's fun. That's a lot of fun. But no, I primarily work with adolescents. Yeah, that's the population I work with. So yeah, I think that adolescents they deserve somebody who's spent a lot of time thinking about what they need rather than just, I don't know, like a random old doctor at your pediatrician's office. Like, you guys deserve somebody who's thinking about you and doing research for you. And thinking about what you need. And so I got really passionate about that and then focused in on working with adolescents. And like I said, you guys are fun, You laugh at my jokes. Adults don't laugh at my jokes ever, and so I like that too.
Well, I appreciate you and the work that you do specifically that like what you just said kind of like touched me in a way because it just feels good to know that, there are adults that care that much. Ugh, why am I getting emotional? But it's just good to know that there are adults that care that much because I feel like sometimes specifically now there's so much pressure and it just meant a lot that you said that. I don't know why. Like why I'm getting so emotional.
No, it really does to know that adults, like there's adults that take the time to think about it the way we think about it. Like even sometimes your parents, like they always mean well, but they don't always always think about it the way we think about it. And knowing that there are people out there that are really conscious about how we see the world and really want to understand it so they can help us, it makes all the difference in the world, and we really appreciate that so much.
I want to say this. I can tell you specifically and all other ambassadors, like you do a lot of work to help others in this, like, among your peer group and with this topic. And I hope you two know that, like, you deserve emotional support. Like, I can't imagine how taxing this must be to feel a lot of weight of, like, I gotta help out my peers. Like, I gotta check in. Like, what do I need to do to help them? And I hope you two also get the support that you need, that, like, you deserve emotional support. Even though you're supposed to be the ones that have it all together and you know all the facts and you know what you're doing, whatever, that you guys deserve as well, somebody that's checking in with you and making sure that you're okay. I'm so glad that you're putting in all this work to check in with others.
Thank you.
Like, this is like our little tier, like, okay, I'm doing it and you guys are doing it. And I'm just so glad that there's, people like you out there who just care so much, care enough to get emotional and like all of that.
But that just shows like how like full circle it is and like how it all contributes into like the greater good. Like we're all just trying to get to this common ground of like everyone should have like the best chance that they have the best support and not be like weighed down by a substance or a harmful product or peer pressure and stuff like that. So we've touched all the bases. We touched mental health. We talked about the science behind it, addiction, brain development. I mean, therapy. We've hit it all. So I'll just go ahead and just thank you so much for this productive conversation.
It was fun.
We've hit all the bases. We've learned a lot about ourselves and just about mental health and drug abuse and drug reliance in general. So thank you so much for coming with us today and joining us. And I'm really excited to continue the work and just continue working towards a healthier Texas.
Good luck. I'll see you out there.
Awesome.
See you
out there.
Thank you.